Well, hello and welcome to LinkSquares. In our webinar today, we're going to be talking about how to redline, and we're going to learn a few tips and tricks from some of our very own at LinkSquares. Really excited today to be joined by Jonathan Greenblatt, who is our VP of Legal here at LinkSquares, and Ashlyn Donahue, who is our Director of Legal. So I'll let them just give a quick hello, and then we can set an agenda for the webinar.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sam. I'm really looking forward to this, talking about sort of redlining etiquette and tips of things that you didn't learn in law school. I have 13 years of experience working in-house at startup companies and have a lot of experience sort of negotiating red lines and sort of the effects of not having the right optics when you're redlining documents and sort of some of the friction that it can create. And so over time, I've learned a lot of tips and tricks that allow me to sort of create the right optics when we're sending red lines back, that it just really smooths out the entire contract process. So really looking forward to talking about this today.
Hi, my name is Ashlyn Donahue. I'm the Director of Legal here at LinkSquares. Looking forward to chatting with Jonathan and Samantha today about just contract tips and etiquette. I've been practicing in-house for over 10 years, worked at LinkSquares and a couple other larger tech companies, and I've learned some tips and tricks along the way to really help facilitate the transaction forward and help your business partners achieve their goals, but also find a path that works for both parties.
Amazing. Great. Yeah, no, excited to hear from you both. We already talked through some introductions and kind of the subject matter, of course, which is learning to redline. Really excited today as we, the three of us prepared for this webinar, we thought what would be, really valuable to, individuals wanting to learn more about best practices. So what we're going to focus the call today on is a little bit of an example. There are effectively two ways to redline, perhaps one way that reflects better practices and one way that reflects more problematic practices. So to the untrained eye, these two redlined contracts may look the same, but to Jonathan and Ashlyn, there are some clear differences that they are wanting to share with us. So that's where this webinar will go, though. Before we really get into it, wanted to talk about, to the two of you, how you both have really begun to or continue to refine your craft as commercial counsel. So if you guys wouldn't mind just giving a bit of background, how you got started in the in-house space and some of the lessons you've learned along the way, different mentors. Would just love to hear about both of your backgrounds.
Yeah, sure thing, Sam. I'll start. So I've been, as I mentioned, working in-house for 13 years. I started straight out of law school, and I learned in-house just through our deputy GC. I had joined a company called GridPoint. They were a startup that had raised a lot of money and had a lot of cool technology. And so she showed me the sort of the basics. She got me off the ground and learning to redline, like what are the things you want to be thinking about, what are the terms you accept, what are the terms you reject. And I think over time, you do want to hone your craft. And I've had other mentors along the way who've given me tips that have allowed me to really create a good looking document, I will call it, for when you send the other side. Because when you're sending red lines, you are now negotiating points. You are telling another side, like, I'm not agreeing with your points. And when you have a document that looks clean and it really helps everybody in the process, particularly your own business partners, because they want to always go, whether it's a customer, a vendor, a partner, they always want to go and show the other side that we're working collaboratively with you. And so having worked with companies in the enterprise space where that is very important to show a customer or a vendor that, like, we're here to sort of play ball and work, and we're going to make this a smooth process, as smooth as we can, it really goes a long way. And so over those sort of 13 years, I've sort of, like I said, slowly gathered some tips along the way to sort of help it be a smoother process.
Yeah, so I actually started in a little bit of a different scenario than Jonathan, which was super interesting to kind of hear how he's learned along the road here. I started at a large tech company, actually sitting in their deal desk, which was a really fantastic way to learn, not just about redlining and learning about how to work, with your external counterparties, but also how to work with your internal business partners, and really have the right discussions with them around context. And so I learned through that, and then moved into a role where I had some mentors at another tech company that really helped me hone, I would say, the art of a comment and how you respond back to really facilitate that conversational nature of the negotiation to really help move it forward rather than just like the actual redlining of the document, right? How you make the changes. And so that was a huge impact on me. And I'm still learning along the way, like picking up new tips and practices as I go on.
Yeah, that's awesome. While you guys were talking just about a few of those tips, it almost made me want to go back to this slide, looking at, the better example of redlining and the better practices that I'm sure you both are excited to share. And then some of the more problematic practices. Before we really get into that though, I'm curious, when you, especially early in your career, as you were getting started, were you finding just a challenge? Can we talk about like just the very beginning of your redlining experiences? What was that like? How did you kind of learn how to tackle different types of contracts at different companies and in those different spaces?
Yes.
Yeah. So for me, it was starting with sort of the training that my boss, the deputy GC at the time, had given me. And you there are certain types of contracts where you get the positions, like you're told sort of these are the positions. You also can refer to the company's template, like the standard template, and sort of see what would our standard position be. And from that, you can sort of extrapolate, this is how I should be negotiating the contract. And so a lot of junior lawyers, when you're just getting started, you're trying to get everything that's in sort of the standard template into your comments when you're working, let's say, particularly on another party's paper. And over time, you sort of figure out what to really care about. And a lot of that is coming through the mentorship of, hey, what do I really need to care about? What do I really need to sort of bring forward from template A, which is our standard, into the template that is the counterparty's template. And so that is sort of one way you start and learn. Another is you will always come across new types of contracts that you had never really worked on before, and that probably your boss has never worked on. And there it's just sort of takes some thinking and researching, right? Like researching, like what are the potential key issues here, and maybe doing some even some Googling as to like sort of what are standard terms looking like what's market, what's not market. So a lot of that is developed sort of on your own, and in addition to like your sort of mentors. And then sort of as you like personally, as I evolved, I had other mentors who would provide more like teaching along the way that was really helpful. My last experience, I worked for a great company, Cofense, and we have a lot of customers in the enterprise space, and getting the mentorship from my boss at that time was very helpful, because from there you're oftentimes the sort of the quality of the paper that you put out in terms of like how bloody is it, as we sort of say in the industry, like how bloody of a document is it? It becomes very important, because the sales team does not want to send over a document to a Fortune 10 company that is just 100% marked up and looks extremely ugly, because it makes it look like you don't want to do business with them. So you have to be very tactical about how you approach the language. And so sort of through that sort of mentorship, through the trial and errors, through like the sales team coming to me or to sort of other folks on my team and saying, hey, I'm sort of willing to send this document over, you refine how you approach this.
Yeah, that's great. Ashlyn, anything to add?
No, I think that, one of the things that I just want to highlight that Jonathan mentioned was really just like having that base foundational knowledge. As you're starting out in your career, you might have playbooks or things that you're kind of improving on and learning on a more day-to-day basis. But as things change or you're introduced to new agreements, maybe like post GDPR, many of us were finding ourselves in a position where we're negotiating a lot more data processing addendums. Going back and building on those foundational skills and understanding the substance behind the edits that you're making, I think is so key to helping you effectively negotiate and modify a document in a way that is going to, not just be all red because you're just cutting and pasting.
Yeah, Yeah, no, that's
Yep. And I would add with sort of the invent of modern CLM, I think one of the great things is that like legal teams oftentimes in the past when I started my career, they were very like disparate in their sort of work and transparency. So when my boss was working on something, she emailed it out. I wasn't necessarily CC'd. But with CLM and with LinkSquares, when we bring on junior attorneys, they can actually go ahead and look at how I redline something. They can sort of actually look by example and to see. They don't have to necessarily bother me. They can just sort of go and see what work what work I've done, and they can emulate that and ask questions about why did you accept this and why didn't you accept that? Like why did we not take this from our standard template? So being able to sort of actually see the work product of your of people that you want to learn from is extremely important as well.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, again, even when we were chatting just shortly before this call, you know, we're talking about like there's a best practice. There is a right way to do things in order to reflect that you want to become a business partner. Jonathan, you shared something that I thought was like really helpful, which is that you know, both parties have their standard terms, and the way that you meet in the middle is what's going to show that desire to be a partner. You have to actually look at the language that's stated in the agreement in order to make the right types of changes. And again, that's what leads into the tips and tricks. You both have had, you know, 10-year plus careers. Was there a piece of advice that helped you kind of develop that right framework into partnership and kind of shift away from I just want to have our preferred language in this agreement, and any advice that you know made a mark?
For me, it was my boss coming and talking to me about 5 years ago saying, hey, Jonathan, like make sure you're sort of reading every single word that's in like the other side's paper or in their comment. And let's make sure to sort of accept what we can accept. I think as we have a tendency to just read the start of a sentence and or sort of read the entire sentence and find things we don't like in the sentence and then just strike through the whole sentence.
Mm-hmm.
But we can probably accept the concept if we maybe make a tweak or two here and there. And I think just having that framework of like, hey, have confidence in yourself that you're sort of understanding the concept, and it's more about the making sure you get the concept in than it is about our specific language. And I think that particularly as a more junior attorney, you're very stuck in trying to get the entire section of how you have it in your playbooks or in your standard language, and just sort of have confidence in yourself that you're understanding the concept. And if you're not, like, make sure you understand the concept that's in the agreement before you make any comment. It's just really important to sort of think through every sentence. And when you're redlining to see like, well, is this actually something we can conceptually agree to? And if not, is there a way to make the sentence a sentence that I can work with and live with?
Yeah, I think for me,
What about you, Ashlyn?
yeah, so I think for me, one of the things that really kind of altered the way that I approach negotiation and redlining was a conversation similarly Jonathan I had with my boss, probably approaching 5 years ago, my boss at the time, just around the partnership with the business and making sure that I was investing the time to understand their goals and objectives. And so sometimes as, you know, a legal team member, you might have an assumption about what you think maybe they would want around cancellation provision in an event contract, for example. And so taking the time to understand, like, what are they looking to get out of here? What is their objective from this partnership with this third party? Really helps refine what you're going to focus on in that agreement. So it's not just all red for things that maybe we're comfortable with.
Yeah, definitely. And like even thinking about the optics, right? Like the look of a very bloody contract with, you know, entire blocks deleted and you know, not any comments explaining why, as opposed to you know, maybe a more friendly partnership driven optic. You know, that goes a long way, I'm sure. In terms of those like problematic practices throughout your career, what have you seen to be you know, a big blocker in negotiation, something that really does consume a lot of time and from the, you know, optics perspective, not make the best impression.
Yeah, I think something that's just like wholesale deletions and changes when you're not reading the entire contract sort of to get the concepts, I think is the biggest turnoff. There's nothing worse when you get on a call and the other side like says, what's wrong with this language? And you can't articulate your specific reason. You can't just say, I liked my language better. And that, I think, sort of not taking the time to try to like really see like, does this make sense? And can I work with this language? Is I think a big problem. And then I think just sort of wholesale deleting without providing context, just again provides the other side, like you don't know what the other side knows about your company and your contract. So it's just a big turnoff when you get just this huge bloody deletion and insertion and no context. So sort of going to Ashlyn's point, like, right, it's like not giving the other side the context of what you guys are doing and how you are sort of like how you're thinking about the contract. One thing I love, and we'll sort of talk more about tips, is like sometimes when you get a contract that just like it's just doesn't work for what you're trying to either buy or sell or the way you want to partner, is like providing at the very top just a hey, this is the reason this document looks like it is. I think that's very important to be able to help give the other side the context of like, hey, this is like why I did what I did. And it might not be the other person who's like the actual reviewer on the other side. It could be somebody who's in the business and sort of passing it along that's on the other side that's receiving it. And just for them to be able to sort of read that in plain language, this is like the reason this looks like this, it gives them a lot more comfort of, hey, I understand, okay, this is why the other side did it. Maybe I don't necessarily agree with it, but I have that understanding and I'm going to pass this along. This has been somebody on the other side who's been thoughtful.
Yeah. Kind of that reminder that you're just dealing with another person that has the same type of role. Like they want favorable terms for, their business, for their company's obligations, the legal business partnership aspect. It's, sometimes easy to get lost in the fight or in the negotiation itself.
Yeah, I think just
go
totally.
ahead.
Yes, I totally agree with Jonathan. And sometimes what I find helpful in those instances is like there is that scenario that comes up sometimes when you're working off paper that maybe just doesn't quite work for the situation. You've made a lot of edits. Offering to get on the call right after, having a pre-scheduled call right before you send it over so that you can walk through and discuss live, that can really help move the needle and build that trust and partnership so you can provide that context and clarity is sometimes appropriate, right?
Yeah, definitely. When do you feel like it's a good call to say, hey, how about we just discuss on the phone? When have you found that to be the right move in the negotiation phase?
For me, it's when like, to be honest, there's never a wrong time for a call. So it's always great to sort of open the dialogue, like having sort of like a personal discussion. And so but sort of like you obviously can't do like every agreement, you can't sort of schedule a call at the very beginning. So I think the times that I try to schedule a call is when, let's say there are a lot of comments. Like sometimes, one strategy is before you send your comments back is to actually set up a call and just walk them through, let's say the sort of their comments and sort of how you're going to respond without actually giving the feedback. But typically what I want to do is like when there's just a lot of ground to cover, I think that's when it's the most important. So like a lot of ground to cover, let's just get on a call and sort of go through this. Like, and then I sort of say B is like when you're sort of getting into those really thorny issues that you sort of see that the other side, has a position on, you want to discuss it because, in negotiation, we're always trying to figure out what are the sort of the interests over the position. Like why, like why did they take that position? Because you can probably bridge the gap once you know the why, but you'll never know the why without getting on the call. So once I get into those thorny issues, and there's just sort of, we're going back and forth on the same topics, let's just get on a call and understand the why.
Yeah, that's awesome. Kind of makes me think like of the good example and the bad example of the negotiation, right? So knowing all of that, if you were to have a new like attorney on your team that, submits a contract to you that, reflects that, bad version, how are you working with that younger attorney to say, hey, this is how we move away from just deleting blocks of text to inserting, hey, more intuitive and thoughtful, respectful red lines.
Yeah.
Ashlyn, you manage multiple teams. Yeah, what are your thoughts on this?
So, so I think that for me, one of the things that I like to do is start with the context. Like I'm a big believer of providing the framework and the why behind anything that we're suggesting for our team or for my team, right? And so sitting down with them and giving them the reasoning for how we approach things, and working with them and being open and amenable to just finding a path forward by maybe it's like, hey, pick 3 clauses, just redline them, send them over, and let's talk about it live. And then incrementally, if there's more complicated issues or they have more nuances, kind of walk through those, how you respond back in a comment, or be open and willing to have the time on your calendar to be there to help support that growth, I think is really important.
No, I think Ashlyn sort of hit the nail on the head, but sort of going back to like giving letting them see your work, like letting them like we have to be very open source as sort of leaders in the legal department with how we do our work. And there can be like a lot of nuance to how you did something. And like, you want to make sure that the junior lawyer understands that there is that nuance. But I think the best way to handle the sort of the thousands of words we see in each of our contracts is to sort of give them access to your prior work on the subject matter, and then sort of talk through that.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any better way than sort of watching by example.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of like different playbooks, as you've worked to, develop playbooks for our LinkSquares agreements, coming from other companies, are you kind of bringing those playbooks, some of those tips and tricks with you along the way, or is it really like starting from scratch when you landed a new company?
It really depends, right? Like it's to the extent things are the same, you're probably sort of repurposing some of the like how you approach things at prior companies. But every company is different. Every sort of product or whatever the revenue generator for that company is different. So oftentimes you'll be going to a company where what you did at your last company just doesn't make sense. It's like either wholly inapplicable or it's maybe the same industry, but what this company is doing is so different that it's important to create like the bespoke playbook for that company. And I think sort of a big danger is what you could sort of a problem that can be created is you take playbook from your last company thinking like this is how we should always negotiate things, and it really doesn't fit the new company, and you can potentially even get a little bit lazy because when you join, I think any company you join, you want to be sort of thinking afresh of what are the risks of this company and what are the rights that need to be protected for this company.
Yeah. Ashlyn, you probably have more fresh experience, with that whole shifting tasks, shifting companies. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything Jonathan just echoed, I'll echo that. I think that it's just important to spend some time listening, listening to what is important to your business partners, listening to your legal leaders and the folks that you're working with on your team. Like, how do we approach things here? There is no one size fits all, and it can be very company specific. And I think what you want to avoid doing, or what I wanted to avoid doing when I came, is stepping in and saying like, this is the way that things should be done, because there is nuance. There's just deviations, and you have to account for that from company to company in the same way that you're going to account for deviations in how you approach a redline agreement for a customer deal versus vendor, or depending on the product or purchase that you're making.
How
and
do
also
you
you have to talk to the business, right? Like every business is going to have a different approach on sort of risk appetite, and you need to understand what is the management from the organization that you're now working with. What is their appetite for these things? And I think it's a really good exercise to sort of sit down and talk through, like once you've built a level of experience, say, hey, these are the thorny issues that always pop up. Like, these are my thoughts on the risk, like as legal. Sit down with your CEO, CFO, like, how do you view these? And sort of create your playbook from there.
Yeah, no, that's such a great point, is like you have to understand the needs of the business in order to effectively represent the company, represent us in, making the right red lines and the right again agreements for the needs of the company. That's interesting to me. When you work with those different components of the business, with the CEO, your CFO, do you kind of discuss, hey, this is our priority for contracts, these are our our enterprise deals, these are our vendors that we really want to prioritize? Is that something that you guys are able to collaborate on, or is it more so like an unspoken understanding of business needs?
Ashlyn, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think that there are some ways that you can quickly come in and kind of get your thumb on the pulse of like what is important to the business, and what is a priority. And I think one of the things that I feel very fortunate to have always had is to have very open communications with the business partners at all levels, who are willing to come and say like, hey, this is a priority for my team, here's why. And be comfortable going back to other departments or senior leadership and ask like, hey, what's your opinion? Like, how do you want me to manage my time with these two competing priorities at this moment?
Mm.
And I think that it's something that you kind of learn over time as your career progresses, of like how to prioritize generally, but always have that openness and willingness to hear if folks have other suggestions or want you to kind of shift gears.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of like priority and efficiency and SLAs, is that like time limits that you've had to track as a legal team, or is it other units of the business that are coming to you and saying, hey, we need to be faster or prioritize this over the other?
All right, Ashlyn.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I think so, it depends on the business team. So for, lots of companies, the sales organization wants to have SLAs in their contracts because it's important, right? Deal velocity is something that's really top of mind for them. And so having SLAs, or being able to look at your data to see what you can reasonably commit to for an SLA with your sales team or other internal business partners, depending on their needs, I think is key.
Great. Well, anything else, Jonathan, to add? I know, we could go on for tips and tricks and etiquette and best practices, but anything else to add there?
No, nothing else to add to that point.
Cool. All right. Well, that kind of concludes the discussion here. If there's any questions from those listening, happy to field those. I think a couple have come in. One that I saw that was interesting is, in terms of etiquette, how hard are you trying to push your own templates in the redlining process? At what point is it understandable to just accept the other party's paper?
So I think this depends, right? Like, this depends on what it is that the contract is for. So for SaaS providers, it is your terms of service are generally pretty tailored to the products and services that you're providing. And so in my experience, SaaS providers generally prefer to work off their own paper because there might be certain product specific items that are included in there. But maybe for an event, for example, if you're going to be renting out some space, that might be a time where you're more amenable to reviewing an event contract. And so I think it really depends, not only on the type of agreement, but also, again, going back to that, like, what is important for your business and your business partners. And there are certain organizations that will decide like, hey, for this event, we have this standard form that we want people to use. And, here's when we want to fall back on that, but this is how we're going to scale as an organization. And I think that it's important to kind of always be adapting and thinking about like how you want to approach based on on what makes sense for your company, but also kind of what will best support your business partners and scale as your company grows.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great answer. Just saw another question come through, which really excited to ask. But the question was, what is the major difference between like the good and the bad contract? So I'll let both of you tackle it, but while I scroll back to the right slide, either of you feel free to answer what makes, the agreement to the left, I'm guessing the less favorable contract, and the agreement to the right, the one reflecting those better practices.
Yeah, so I can sort of tackle a few of these. Like, I think like when the sales team gets the document on the left, and sort of imagine a full document. And this is, I am ashamed to say that probably earlier in my career, some of my documents came back to the counterparty looking like the one on the left. You know, when your internal team sees that, it's like, ooh, we are so far apart. Like there is like, if you look, the sort of the defining color of the agreement on the left, I would say is red. I would say the defining color of the agreement on the right is like white, with some sort of red interspersed. But starting sort of with that optic, then you're sort of looking at like the deletions, right? There's just a lot of deletions. It's very difficult. The document on the left is very difficult to read. The document on the right is much cleaner and much easier to read. It's also it essentially is adding to the concepts for the most part, where there is already existing language. So I would sort of say that's the sort of initial starting point. I would say a few other techniques here that are really important is, let's say, just even like inserting your name, right? I think the first page is always so important. When you're doing a document, always be conscious of that first page, because that is going to be your business partner's reaction is going to be based off of the first page they see. And so even something like when you see the word LinkSquares Inc. on the left document, and then you have this long red line where there was a sort of a blank that was supposed to be filled in, like you don't need to keep that in. Like just accept it and make it just LinkSquares with no space. And it's just like the document starts looking cleaner. The goal is to constantly be making the document look cleaner. It telegraphs to the business that, hey, we are making progress here. So I would say that sort of jumps out at me as sort of the first two techniques that are super important when you're working on these documents and trying to optimize sort of how clean they look.
Anything to add, Ashlyn?
No, I mean, all of those are great points. I think one of the things that stuck out to me on the left is some of the change in definitions. And that's something you have to be really careful with, because those definitions are flowing through the entire agreement. You make a change up top, you got to catch that throughout the entire document. So just like, is that really required? Is it necessary? Is the concept the same? Those are the questions that I ask myself when I'm making changes that maybe don't need to be made, right?
Yeah, and I would sort of add sort of to sort of sort of making it optically cleaner, right? You sort of think about your definitions and sort of be always strategic about, if I make this definition, if I just change the definition or tweak it a little bit, will that now but I keep their sort of use of the word. So instead of sort of services, which is what's in our template, this document uses SaaS services. If I can sort of make what I'm trying to capture in my document fit their definition, it's really going to make the entire document look a lot cleaner. And so when you look at the one on the right, they've sort of accepted those changes. I think another thing too is like you are going to have to delete from time to time. That's actually a really good place to put comment bubbles, because the comment bubbles also sort of like change the way the document looks. Instead of that sort of glaring red like strike through, it is now this sort of fuzzy purple with an explanation as to why I did this, like why this doesn't necessarily apply. And I think that's again, I think it helps the document just look a lot cleaner. And sort of, as I think this is really the goal when you're redlining, is how can you make that document look clean? And I think, when you get a document that's just very well thought through from the other side, it also just telegraphs to the other side, like there's somebody who's a very good reviewer reading this working on the other side. Like they know what they're doing.
Mhm. Right, which I'm sure just can only positively affect the negotiation if there's that understanding that, hey, I'm working with a partner, someone that respects our templates and respects our company's obligations, but of course, has to advocate for the needs of, your own business. That's awesome. I know we're kind of approaching the allotted time for today, but thank you both, Jonathan and Ashlyn, for such wonderful feedback, such great tips and tricks. If any, other questions, to those listening, just feel free to reach out to us at LinkSquares. We have a, great tool that can make redlining, reviewing contracts a lot easier for your team. And we're all happy to help here.
Thanks, Sam.